Happy New Year! Father Harrison, Happy New Year! Why are you not as excited as I am? Happy New Year! It's Advent, baby!
It is Advent. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's Advent. It's Advent. But is it really the new year? Is this more of a new cycle?
Listen, this is the beginning of the liturgical year, and I think that means Happy New Year. I'm very excited about it. I'm tired of green. Let's get some purple in this business. I'm pumped.
I'm someone who appreciates God's created order, and God's created order says the new year starts on January 1st.
Here's a deep, dark secret of theology that I don't completely believe. I only half believe. I half believe that the church can make stuff up and God's totally cool with it. So if the church says the new year starts now, I think God's like, yeah, sweet, cool, that works.
But has the church actually ever said this is the new year?
This is the beginning of the liturgical year. Father Harrison, which cycle of readings were we on a week ago?
Ordinary time.
Yeah. And year A, right?
Yeah.
This is year B.
But is that like a magisterial statement, or is this just like a title that's just given to the cycle?
Harrison, is it year A? No,
I'm just saying.
It's year B.
Listen, I'm just asking questions.
Sounds to me like a new year. Happy New Year. Oh my gosh! You know what? I'm glad because I think we needed a little bit of break because I'm very excited to record today.
Same here.
But
same here.
As I was saying, it is a new year. And New Year's mean a lot of different things. So it's the beginning of this new liturgical year. That means things have ended and things have begun.
And how do we begin? By ending stuff again with Advent. It's like the end is coming.
It is weird. And we can talk about that maybe a bit later. But speaking of something that's ended, I have an announcement I'm very excited to make. Something has ended on Clerically Speaking.
Uh-oh. What?
I have fired producer Nick.
What?
Did you hear last week's episode?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So producer Nick's like, I will do a little bit of content on my own. I won't tell the priests. I'll just do it, and there'll be no consequences.
Actually, no. Hold on. What? He did tell us. He didn't. Yes, he did.
I mean, I listened to that episode.
Did you read the texts that he sent us?
I listened to the episode.
Did you read the texts?
And he said that he was not going to tell us about this. This is kayfabe. Stay kayfabe with me. Okay? So he said he wasn't going to tell us. And he thinks just because he's the brother of the world's okayest priest, he can just get away with stuff. But I'm not a clericalist. I don't play that way. There are consequences to our actions. And if producer Nick wants to go rogue on us, well, guess what, buddy? You're fired.
So how is he going to make this up to us?
He's going to make it up to us by editing this podcast and continuing his job as normal.
Okay. I wanted to push for something. I want my own Summa Tweetologica mug.
That's fair. I feel like we should get can we get mugs for free?
I don't know. I have no idea. I want one of those mugs. So I think that's what he owes us. He owes us each a mug.
If you haven't checked out clericallyspeaking.com lately, producer Nick has used his creativity to put his own face on an image of Thomas Aquinas.
On our podcast.
And instead of Thomas Aquinas holding the Summa, he's holding the little Twitter bird. And it's just the silliest thing. And I'm not going to lie, I love it. It's great.
I kind of totally love it. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so if you want to support Clerically Speaking and get stuff, the mug is pretty cool.
So before you go any further, speaking of kayfabe, what did you think of Summer Series? Or not Summer Series,
Survivor Series.
Survivor Series, sorry.
I'm so proud of you. I can't believe this is the first time we've been doing this 2.5 years and you have asked me about wrestling.
Well, and there are reasons for this. And part of me is kind of sad that you didn't hang out with Father Dan and I the other night when we were watching it together. And Father Nick and Kyle and a few other people, we were all watching it together and you weren't there.
I wasn't there. So I'll give you my own explanation. So Survivor Series, historically speaking, is kind of like a Thanksgiving pay-per-view. And I was, at the time, busy, and I wanted to save it for Thanksgiving. My Thanksgiving was temporarily canceled because I had a little bit of a COVID scare. Since then, I have tested negative, and I haven't had symptoms in over a week, so I'm feeling pretty good. So I ended up watching the Survivor Series as my family was napping after our Sunday Thanksgiving. So I did watch the whole thing. So I thought it was okay. There's some entertaining things. Mm-hmm. The tag team match was excellent. I was disappointed by the men's 5-on-5 match. Mm-hmm. Asuka versus Sasha Banks was amazing. They have very good chemistry in the ring together. And while the main event was slow and a little bit plodding, I thought they booked it pretty well. I very much like both Drew McIntyre and Roman Reigns right now. So overall, I enjoyed it. And I think you have to be very careful. I'm going to give you some inside scoop. If you don't know stuff about wrestling, like any kind of fandom, if you become... Like there's a bell curve. Like you start by just like, oh, wrestling is fun. And then you start watching all these YouTube videos and listening to all these podcasts and stuff. Then you're like, oh, wrestling is stupid. And you become super snarky about everything. But then you progress. You become enlightened. And like, you know what? If it's fun, then I like it. And I enjoyed the pay-per-view. So what did you think about it, Father Harrison?
Why did you... Interesting.
Yeah.
It was a Sunday night. I had not a whole lot going on for whatever reason.
Must not have.
Because the reason I didn't have much going on is because we're closed down for a couple weeks. Well, not that I don't have much going on. Let me rephrase that. I just didn't have as much as I usually would, and so usually I'd be saying mass at that time, and instead I wasn't. I had some free time, so I was like, oh, Father Dan's hosting a hangout. I'll go check it out. So that's kind of what happened. It was okay. It was interesting. I kind of agree. I think some of the matches were better than others. And I think part of, it's hard to know who to cheer for when you've just kind of come in cold turkey and stuff.
Sure.
But what it did for me, what I found interesting, because unfortunately the one part I missed was like the goodbye to the Undertaker.
Oh, okay.
Because I had to go to a religious ed meeting, which was fine. That's just the way it is. But it kind of got me looking a little bit at, it's like, hey, I remember, because again, I used to watch this stuff in the 90s. A little bit, not like huge. I went to one event in Vancouver. I think it was like I think it was a pay-per-view too. It was like it was a Buried Alive match or something like that.
Nice.
So Undertaker and Mankind, I think, was the main event.
Amazing.
Which is anyway. So it got me. I was like, okay, his career is coming to an end. It'd be interesting. I was like, what was his first match like? It'd be really interesting to look into that. And you watch, and it was like. I was like, oh, that's interesting, and how and then you start watching some things about the history of the character. Like, okay, that's interesting how they kind of, and how like wrestling fans are okay with that, the fact that a character can actually essentially be multiple characters over time.
Yes.
That there doesn't even need to be continuity. It's just like it's just like there's a new person now. It's like okay, and it's like okay, that's interesting. And then it's like then you start looking into some other stuff because again, for me, like the late 90s was like the peak time for wrestling, and so many.
Literally, anybody
it was like the evolution.
Anyone who was a kid in the 90s, everyone watched wrestling in the 90s.
There's not just that, but that was the time because of the WCW coming up. It created a lot of competition, and so I mean, like, you start looking into stuff, you realize just how revolutionary Stone Cold Steve Austin was as a character, and how really it's because of Stone Cold Steve Austin that it really pushed the WWE over WCW and stuff like this, right? Bret Hart's, you look into the Montreal Screwjob, and you're like. And there are those questions.
You should be an expert on this because you're a Canadian.
Yeah, I know.
You need to know these things. This is a part of your culture.
Exactly.
You guys don't have a lot. You've got maple syrup. You've got a lot of geese. You got a lot of moose, and you've got wrestling. And the fact that you
hockey.
Oh, and hockey. Yes, hockey.
And
weird hats.
And by the way, we also usually celebrate Thanksgiving on Sunday. So that means you are a Canadian now.
Yikes. You know what? I'm willing to become at least half Canadian if you're willing to become a wrestling fan. Okay. That is a trade I will make.
There you go. So it was, it was interesting. And then you start, and I found a series from Vice, like Dark Side of the Ring.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
It's really good. It's like,
I love it.
Like, I did not know all the stuff about, Chris Benoit.
Yeah. I was like, super dark.
That was
super
dark,
freaky.
That was sad. It was sad.
Yeah, incredibly sad.
But it also shows you, it's like, and there's that part of me, it's like, man, people really do this to their bodies just to make money. Is this okay?
Money and glory.
But it also does sound like there is a lot more safety today than there was even 20 years ago.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, it's still a very dangerous thing. It is. But
it's like, this is the best part. Mick Foley.
Yes.
I saw a little documentary with him in it or something like that. Every time before a match, he does a sign of the cross.
There you go.
Catholic. He's got 4 kids.
Yeah. Is he actually Catholic? Is he baptized Catholic?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I think he's practicing Catholic.
Look at that.
Which is kind of cool.
That makes me happy.
That's kind of cool.
Very cool.
Sorry. So I was kind of. It was interesting. I'm just not sure. Here's my thing. This is why I'm always hesitant to get into anything, because I am going to just go all in, and you
can with wrestling,
and that's dangerous for me because it's why it's hard for me to have hobbies in general, because my personality makes it very difficult to just enjoy anything in moderation.
Mm-hmm. But the one thing that you can enjoy in moderation is Clerically Speaking. Welcome to Clerically Speaking. I'm Father Anthony.
I'm Father Harrison. After that very, 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 very long intro there. Yeah. Oh, and what? And it's funny. Now I just remember I had a banter topic, and now I've totally forgotten it. Isn't that fun?
Well, I mean, the fact that you ended up talking about wrestling with me in our intro segment, I think that's good enough.
Oh. Okay. I'll keep it for the next one.
Okay.
I'll keep it for the next one. That's plenty. You're right. It is plenty.
Okay. In that case, we will not have a 45-minute long Summa intro. We'll have a regular 40-second intro to the Summa Tweetologica.
Summa Tweetologica. Summa Tweetologica. Summa Tweetologica.
The Summa Theologica was Thomas Aquinas' summary of theology. The Summa Tweetologica is our summary of things we found interesting on Twitter. Timothy P. O'Malley, he tweets, Catholic theology needs philosophy. When philosophy isn't sufficiently taught, theology suffers. Mm-hmm. And this reminded me of, so I was walking into, I had to do confessions for our faith formation. So I did like one class of confessions, and I just visited the classrooms and just talked to the kids a little bit. And one of the teachers like just totally wanted me to just talk a bunch. I was like, okay, fine. And the kids were asking me questions, and somehow we got to the question of philosophy. I think I was telling them what it takes to become a priest. And I was telling them that a lot of questions about God are actually philosophical questions, not theological questions. And so I messed with these 8th graders' brains a little bit. And I gave them the old, can God create a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? Super fun question. Because the question is really about, it's seemingly about God's power, right?
Here's the thing, though. The question's irrational.
Exactly, but you can't cut to the chase. You have to make people suffer first.
I know.
What's the point in knowing philosophy if you can't make others suffer? Another reason why it's very Christian to know philosophy.
Wisdom?
There is no wisdom without suffering. Okay, actually, that's kind of true. Anyway, so it seems like the question is about God's power, right? Because God is all powerful, and so. The kids would be like, can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it? Yes, because he's all powerful. Of course he can make a rock so heavy he can't lift it. Then you tell them, well, that means there's something God can't do. He can't lift this very heavy rock. And they're like, oh, wait. No, God can't make a rock so heavy he can't lift it. And then it's like, well, then the problem is that means God can't do another thing, right? And of course, I make them realize that while the words seemingly make sense, the content of the question is irrational. You're saying, can a thing do a thing it can't do? It doesn't actually make sense. So while it seems like a clever question, you've actually just spoken nonsense. But, I mean, if you don't have, like, some sort of philosophical training, you might get duped by that.
Right.
But, which is just a kind of silly, fun example. Say that even more important than learning the history of philosophy, which I think is valuable, going throughout, because you can understand a lot about the world even today by understanding philosophical systems of weird Germans, right? That's important. But I think even more important than that is that philosophy trains you to think better. It trains you to make distinctions, to think more clearly, to ask right questions and that sort of thing. And that's what really helps you understand theology.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, I'm a big philosophy stan. I love it. I think it's important. My entire first chapter of my thesis is dealing with the problem of mediation in 20th century metaphysics. So it's fun.
and the more philosophy you learn, the less scared you are of the words Father Harrison says in the podcast.
Exactly. So but it's so important for me in so many ways because but at the same time, philosophy cannot be truly philosophical without theology at the same time. They need each other in some ways, right? Pope Benedict always likes to use this phrase that reason has to be purified by the truth, right? And so, because if philosophy just stands alone, then it can easily fall into reason by itself without being answerable to anything truly objective outside of oneself, right? It becomes a subjective exercise of reason where it becomes a kind of pure logic, and so. Or we treat philosophy as so separate from theology that it becomes this pure logic. And even as Catholics, we tend to not see philosophy opening up to theology and it does teach us good methods, but those methods always have to be purified by the truth of the gospel, right? So, for example, I'm probably going to actually do a podcast on this one because I think it's really important. Around the idea of like how do we think and what is the idea of truth as Catholics, because I think it's something we've deeply lost, and I think it's really showing its colors right now. So if you do just philosophy, then it's all about strict reason to the point of a logical system, while the Catholic vision of truth that argues that is actually the natural vision of truth is paradoxical. Right? It's holding two things true at the same time, right? Because why? Because of the incarnation. Jesus is both God and man at the same time, without confusion and without separation. So what does that mean on how we see the world and how we see ourselves? And that's important. So, and this is why Ratzinger in Regensburg Address really argues for theology to be a part of the university, because it's part of reason. And it's part of philosophical inquiry. So, I mean, that's just, basic stuff, or not basic stuff, but that's just general level stuff. But it's so important. It's like, and I hear a lot from seminarians, well, I have to study philosophy. I'm like, trust me, you're going to want to learn as much as you can in these years, because it's going to form you so that, because the whole thing, when you're a priest, you're thrown all sorts of weird situations. And it helps you to think that things aren't always black and white. Things aren't always clear cut. And you don't freak out about it because you're like, wait, maybe there's another way to approach this issue. Maybe there's another way to look at this. Maybe, you can actually, and it helps you listen and not freak out when someone comes at you with a different worldview. And so, theology without philosophy is fideism, but also then philosophy without theology becomes pure rationalism. They need both. They both need each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was something about what you said that I really liked. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's okay to grumble about philosophy if you're a philosophy student, because it's the process of learning philosophy is very much like having your brain melted and then scooped back up and put in your head again. Yeah. And that's not always an easy process.
It is not.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I'm very grateful. I mean, it was especially nice for me because I was able to get 4 years of training because I entered right out of high school. So I just got a degree in philosophy. I
did my undergrad in philosophy as well. I mean, I went through a few programs, and that was at a secular university. And I'm really grateful for that, actually.
Yeah, especially the point of like not getting freaked out about opposing ideas.
Yeah,
because it's something that can plague believers. Even if you run into, like, if you're Catholic and you run into a Calvinist and you're blown away by double predestination or whatever else. A lot of time, or if you're a Catholic and you're talking to an atheist and they seem to trounce you with their own arguments, if you're well trained in philosophy, that stuff doesn't freak you out. It gives you more stuff to think about. Yeah, I think a lot of problems with a lot of times, and also a lot of like popular, quote unquote, popular commentators on theology, you can tell they do not have a sound philosophical background because they are not able to interpret what these theologians are saying. And so they might cast aside something that is actually very faithful, and they'll say it's heresy, or the opposite, saying this is, the opposite of that.
Yeah.
But Catholics should not freak out about ideas.
No, it's. I think one of the good trainings, especially if you approach philosophy with the Catholic spirit, you can start to see, and I take this a lot from Maurice Blondel, who I did my master's thesis on. His method has really kind of influenced how I even practice pastoral work, because it allows an openness and a patience to say what is true in what you're saying, even if the logic or even if the final position is wrong. What is true here? Because I think one of the issues a lot of times in dialogue and conversation we have with people is we presume that because their conclusion is wrong, all the premises are wrong, and so you throw everything out. That is no. That reason will say, well, actually, no. There's a kernel of truth here, and this is actually how the fathers practiced thinking when it came to engaging with ancient philosophy. They said, Plato and Aristotle, they got seeds of the truth. Virgil, all these guys, they got seeds of the truth. Because it's part of the created order, and reason can naturally kind of tend towards God and to look to his effects in creation. And so since the world reveals God, at least in a natural level, natural reflections on creation and God, even if it comes from a pagan person, can have truth to it. Sometimes it might get misguided, but you take what's good there. You don't throw it all out, because I think that's a lot of the issues in a lot of discourse is we think this person is all wrong in all places. And then, because then you get the other side. If you say, well, actually, no, they're right here. People say, no, because they're wrong here. It's it just creates a lot of nasty back and forth. It's no, good philosophy, good reasoning will say, what's good? Let's find out what's good here. So for me, the guys I've been writing on right now, they're engaging a lot with Heidegger. And they're Heidegger's philosophy has a lot of issues.
Yeah.
It's
also confusing as heck, first of all.
There's that. But there's also a lot of good in it, too.
Mm.
And they're saying he actually has some really good insights around the question of being. His issue in the end is that he doesn't have a good concept of analogy, and so beings cannot really reveal a transcendent personal God. For him, everything's still immanent in the created order. But just because that's his conclusion doesn't mean some of the things he says to get there are wrong. And so a good thinker will say, let's take what's good here and let's apply this to the tradition and see if we can, because then it helps us to speak to people today who actually buy into Heidegger or into that worldview and say, and that's how you're supposed to do apologetics.
Right. That's going to bring up my next point, because even having a good understanding of human subjectivity or motivations is helpful as well. If you listen well to an argument with a pastoral mind, you can be like, oh, wait, is this the thing you care about? It sounds like this is the value that you care about. Because let's be honest, as reasoned as we try to be, we all have different motivations underneath. And sometimes if you have a discussion where you can discuss those motivations openly and honestly, then you can have an even better conversation about, even for that silly paradox about God making a rock you can't lift. What do you care about if you're entering into that discussion? You care about whether or not God is all-powerful.
And whether God is reasonable.
Right. And whether God is reasonable, right? Yeah. So once you okay, these are the things that I care about, then you can have a more honest discussion, because a lot of times it ends up just like playing a chess game. It's not about the personal motivations, which always enter into, because even some of the theologians that really focus on the subjective and the personal and who go off on crazy things and will end up saying things like, in a certain sense, God suffers. And I'm dancing around a lot of really deeper issues, but you see some of the value of their thinking is that subjectivity and emotion is helpful in reason. Once you're able to talk about it, discuss it, realize our own motivations, that is a kind of knowledge that can help us in our conversation in pursuing the truth.
Yeah. Okay, I got to do an episode on this because I want to talk about this. Because this is the whole thing about apologetics. That's why I get. Listen, okay. I mean, I got to nuance this a bit to ensure I don't freak people out.
I'm proud of you. Do your best.
But this is why apologetics requires a lot of patience and a lot of charity. And I get, listen, we all want easy to understand answers. it's important. It's necessary. And I think like sometimes the way apologetics is done, that can help us at least starting off. Like I know for myself, when I was starting to practice my faith again, listening to, finding like apologetic sites and dealing with questions around Protestantism, even though I knew no Protestants, was actually a very helpful way to start things off. But and it's not so I'm not saying it should be like totally rejected, but it just so it's helpful, I think, more for us to start as a basis where we're looking for those simple answers to give us to say, yeah, this is why my worldview is justified. It gives me a place to stand. But when we're engaging in a more professional mode with apologetics, we should be careful of offering a too simplistic, like logical proof. Because the fact of the matter is, logic is only one aspect of knowledge and reasoning. It's not the total. In fact, for the medievals, the higher form of knowledge and knowing is the intellectus, the receptive, contemplative side of man. Ratio, that logical kind of breaking apart and reasoning side, that's actually lower in the soul. Yeah. And is less, that's actually not what makes us truly reasonable. Because even the animals at times can break things apart. They can do spatial reasoning and stuff like that. It's the contemplative side of man that makes us truly reasonable. And so that requires then a listening to the heart of the other to see what they want to do. So like for Blondel, for example, when he was doing his stuff on apologetics, he's saying, what is modernity actually saying? And does it hold up to the truth of itself? And does it hold up to the truth and the powers of reason and to the critique of reason? And that's the kind of method he goes on. And he goes through and this is like a 500-page work where he's exploring this idea. And he says it doesn't, because our human desires something more than can ever be possibly even explained by human reason itself. It transcends itself to the point of transcending the created order. And so pure immanence, this world is not enough. It has to open up towards God. But that all started because he took the modern position seriously that says there is no God, or if God exists, he's not interested or interacting with this world. And so all that matters is our own desire within the created realm. He said, okay, I'm going to take you at your word. Let's see if it holds up. That's good apologetics, and that's good reasoning, and that's why philosophy is so important.
Nice.
Sorry.
No, that was good. I think we did a good job on that tweet.
That's it's stuff I'm passionate about. So yeah, I will do a fuller episode on this one day. All right, I guess I should choose a tweet. Okay, this is a fun one. I saw this one on Twitter. I thought, well, this is a fun intellectual exercise. Okay, let's what we just talked about. Let's exercise our intellectual muscles.
Okay.
This is from Nicholas at Wow. It's Nicholas. If babies don't sin, then will we ever be holier than when we were babies? I think this is a serious question. And I thought, you know what? It's a fun question at the very least, because it's trying to get at the question of like, how does grace work? So this is okay. Let's take our last tweet as a little moment here, and let's break this down a bit, right? It's asking a question around grace. How does grace work? Okay, it's asking a question about what is the effect of original sin in comparison with personal sin, right? So if a baby is if babies really don't sin because they have no personal responsibility in sin, and so there's really nothing held in account to them, and they receive the sanctifying grace that comes through baptism, do they become? Is that not just the holiest place to be?
And it's all downhill from there.
And
if you look at it historically speaking, there is a little bit of a vein in that in the early church.
Right.
Oftentimes, catechumens would put off getting baptized until they were much, much older in life. Because at the time, confession was not as well established. It's still a sacrament, but wasn't as established in the church. So the idea was, I'm going to wait until I'm old and about to die, then I'll get baptism. You see a similar thought process here.
And that happened with Constantine. At least that's the popular thing that's being said, is that it was he waited till his deathbed to be baptized, although he was baptized by an Arian. But that's another question for another day.
Yeah.
But so it's a fair question. But so then that's the question. Okay, so then how does grace work? If our baptism gives us sanctifying grace that grafts us onto Christ through his church and gives us everything we need to be a saint, then can we actually become holier? And I think the question is honestly yes, because sanctifying grace is it's while Christ gives us everything of himself, it also requires in us a receptivity to the gift. And I think it's on that subjective side. So like that's where the question is interesting, right? Because it sees, this is true. This is what sanctifying grace does. But where the question maybe ignores something that I think is important is the idea of freedom in grace, right? How do I receive this? How do I appropriate the gift that has been given to me? Which itself is a grace in answer to a grace, obviously. That's, but
lots of grace.
Lots of grace. Just grace everywhere. Just fire hoses of grace,
Yes.
So Christ gives his whole self to the person through baptism, but life is about appropriating the gift that has been received, and that is it's always a full gift given. But it's not just about sin; it's also about the openness of the heart to the gift that is received. And so, the person who, like at Saint Therese of Lisieux, there's a reason outside of the holy innocents who are saints because of their martyrdom. Mm-hmm. This is why we don't have baby saints in the church, because it's not saying they're not holy and they're not in heaven or anything like that. It's just saying they don't have the life that shows the reception and appropriation of grace through their own freedom and their own free will, saying, yes, I want what God is offering me, and my whole life is going to explore and chase after that. And so I do think, yes, you actually do get holier as you get older, because sanctifying grace is always, and that's the other thing, there is no end to being holy. Even when we get, it gets me to explore the idea of maybe when we're in heaven, is there this idea of increasing sanctification? Because God's infinite.
God's infinite, and we're always going to be contemplating the infinite God.
Exactly.
And part of contemplation is reception. So, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think there's also something else, a cultural issue underlying this as well, where it's, I think that it's been here and there in Catholicism, probably throughout history. It's a very kind of puritanical thing as well. The idea that holiness is simply avoiding sin. I think a lot of Catholics, and they might not think it consciously, but very often they will consider, I am holy if I have not sinned. And you get into different levels of scrupulosity on this. A lot of times, you sin, or you either legitimately mortally sin, or you think you mortally sin, and immediately you cut yourself off from prayer. You go into this spiral. You refuse to do anything spiritual until you go to confession. And when people say they're doing well, a lot of times what they mean, they think they're doing well in spiritual life. That means I have not done one of the sins that bothers me. Therefore, I'm doing well. Now, indeed, if you're not doing the sins that bother you, there's something good about that. But I think just on an experiential level, there is a certain kind of holiness about when God, because here's the thing, God allows us to sin also for a reason. One, because of free will, but also because God will use that experience. The person who has been white-knuckling holiness their entire life, who has consciously or unconsciously been striving for holiness through their own will, through their own strength, God will let you do that on your own strength. And you fall and you hit rock bottom eventually. A lot of times it's that experience, and I've had the experience. I think most people have had this experience if you're pursuing the spiritual life. It's like you've been running up against a brick wall over and over again, and you feel bad because you keep getting concussed spiritually against this brick wall. And then finally, you come to a revelation that Jesus Christ is everything. And this is something that I've been kind of praying with and contemplating and working with, that. And this might not be the best way to phrase it, but it's what's been working for me, is that I almost have to let go of the idea of holiness. Because in my life, it's been very corrupted. In my life, holiness is very much like a video game. You get so many Jesus points, or you get extra, character traits by doing this many rosaries or whatever, that sort of thing. And what holiness really is more and more abandoning yourself to God's divine will. And so for me, the transition has been more and more taking myself almost out of the picture. And it's not that I don't have a response, and it's not that I don't have certain things to do, but more and more relying on God's grace. And the way that God chose to bring me to that spot was by allowing me to sin and allowing me to experience his forgiveness. I think we don't realize how dirty and complicated the pursuit of holiness is. And really how much of it is God's work and not our own work. That there's, the reason why Mary is so holy isn't just because she was conceived without sin. It's also because she followed Christ and suffered with him. It wasn't just because she was immaculate, which that's a really big deal, don't get me wrong. But it's also because she was the perfect disciple.
She said yes in every moment.
She said yes in every moment.
In a way, we idealize holiness as if it's some thing outside of ourselves and outside of our moment, as a kind of spiritualized idealism, rather than something achieved through the moment, through the created incarnate reality, through the things that are given in front of us, right? That's how you achieve holiness. Holiness is not, okay, I want to chase this ideal. So to achieve this ideal, these are the 10 steps I need to take, but rather it's an answer to God's will in this moment right now. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's about actually paying more of a contemplative attention to the moment we live in, rather than a contemplative attention to the goal. Say holiness is only achieved right now.
Yes, I completely agree. This is the image I've been using. So holiness is walking with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so often we're like, Jesus, but I should be all the way over there down the road.
Right.
And Jesus is like, we're going there. But we're like, but if I ran, I could get there faster. It's like, well, then you wouldn't be walking with me.
Right.
And this is like a whole paradigm shift for myself and for a lot of people. It's like, no. You are here with Jesus now, walking in the right direction. And yes, you're going to stumble and he's going to pick you up and you're going to go off the path. But the point of holiness is just walking with Jesus right now.
Exactly.
Don't worry about the goal. He knows where the goal is. He's the shepherd. The sheep doesn't get to figure out where the goal is. No.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
Amen. We should
awesome
do a topic now.
Let's do a topic now.
Sure, why not?
I really liked our discussion on both of those tweets.
Those are good. That was good discussion.
Hopefully we got more good stuff for you in presbyteral exhortations.
And now it is time for presbyteral exhortations.
Oh, yes. Quite good.
Indubitably. I bet they can't wait to learn.
They're gonna learn so much. It's my favorite part. It's the best part.
Yes, quite. Yes, quite.
It just shows you sometimes, maybe a break is a little nice thing once in a while. Just to, because when you're going every single week, every time, it's like you always have to create new content, and it's tough. It's tiring sometimes. And you're just like, my brain feels full. So a little break, it's like, oh wait, I feel refreshed.
It was very refreshing. So like I said in the beginning of the episode, Happy New Year. This is, objectively speaking, we both agree, a new year, because not only is it
that
year
was
B
the most Trump thing you've just done right there. Sorry. We both agree. The experts agree. The experts
agree. A lot of people are saying that this is a new year. And because it's a new year, we get a new breviary.
Before you go any further, can I just say one thing why I'm really excited about this, about the new breviary?
Tell
the new
me
volume?
Why.
For somehow, I think I lost my volume 4 in my move. So I've had to pray on my phone for the last 12 weeks or whatever. And so I'm just so happy to be back to a physical copy. I'm just super excited.
I mentioned this as well. I don't know what I did with my copy of Volume 4.
Right.
I have checked producer Nick's house. I have checked my parents' house. I have checked my friend's house. Those are the only places I've gone.
Yeah.
I have checked several of my 7 churches. I do not know where it is. So I have been using the app on my phone. But the problem, it's very hard for me to pray with the app on my phone. Because normally I like to pray morning prayer and office of readings during my morning holy hour. But I know if I bring this phone in the chapel, I will check Twitter. So I've had to bring it outside the chapel, and I've been praying it, but it's just been super annoying. So I'm with you.
Yeah.
Very good to have the book.
Yes. All right. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's good because I was going to bring up that story anyway because I think we mentioned that earlier. Yeah. But hey, we talk about liturgy hours all the time.
Yeah.
Father Harrison, what is the liturgy of the hours? What is the breviary?
It's the prayer of the church.
Mm-hmm.
With the Psalms, right? And so the church prays with Christ, the head, the entire Psalms, which is Israel and the church's cry to God.
Very good. But we're going to make this even simpler than that.
All right.
Excellent answer. The Liturgy of the Hours is a prayer that's existed in many different forms since the very beginning of the church. Mm-hmm. And it even has Jewish roots. It has roots in the Psalms that are prayed. Because in the Psalms it talks about praying 5 times a day or 7 times a day, right?
Yeah. 7.
And waking up in the middle of the night to praise the Lord. That's in the Psalms. And so this is something that has been a tradition in the Jewish faith and something that Christians continue to do. Because what's the best way to pray? Well, it looks like through divine scripture that God has given us some words to pray. So how about we keep doing this? And what was very exciting for the early Christians is that they got to have a whole new look on the Old Testament. That now they realize, because of Christ, that everything is referring to Christ in some way. Mm-hmm. So not only are these the words of David, of the psalmist, not only are they the words of God, these are the words of Christ. One, he actually prayed them. Mm-hmm. So Jesus Christ prayed these words. And two, you can hear Christ's voice throughout the Psalms. Mm-hmm. It's his cry to the Father in many cases. So Christians are very excited about this. So very early on in different forms, there's the praying of the Psalms. Over time, especially in monastic cultures, they more and more codified this sort of thing. So let's, pray 7 times a day, praying the Psalms. Let's try to get through all of them in a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. And as the church expands and goes outward, different traditions develop, just like with the Mass, how different traditions develop throughout the ancient and medieval church. Mm-hmm. And at various times, popes try to bring it all together, try to reform it, try to make it more unified. Because the idea is that this is the prayer of the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. This is liturgy. Mm-hmm. And for liturgy to look like what it is, it makes sense that the prayer be the same.
Right.
So if we're one body praying one prayer, it should look pretty similar, right?
Right.
So throughout history, there's been tons of this, just like there have been tons of reforms with the Mass. Most recently happened during Vatican II?
After, I think.
It was started working on it during Vatican II.
Yeah, and we're expecting, because there's a new typical edition in Latin, and so now they're retranslating the entire breviary right now, which I'm really looking forward to, because our closing prayers, for example, do not match the translations that are in the Missal.
Yeah. And just as a side note, because every seminarian is a bit of a dork, all of us dorky seminarians, we asked the seminary faculty, can we just write down the prayers that are in the Mass, the new translation, and use them for the Liturgy of the Hours? They're like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah. And
so,
I mean, that was the one benefit of the phone. It did put that translation there, which I always really liked, because but that's my one little beef with this, is that it's not updated. But there
should be a beef about that, because part of the idea of praying the Liturgy of the Hours is that it is an extension of the Mass. Mm-hmm. So it's if the Mass is, just to use an image, if the Mass is the heart of the tree, if it's the trunk, then the Liturgy hours are the branches that go throughout the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. Or it's like kind of the lifeline in between Masses. It keeps the prayer of the church flowing. It connects you to the Mass in this way by praying these Liturgy of the Hours. Mm-hmm. So, Father Harrison, who prays the Liturgy of the Hours?
I mean, anyone can, but it depends. So, priests are obliged to pray it 5 times a day, right? Mm-hmm. And then I know a lot of religious communities, like religious sisters and stuff, they often will do something like morning and evening prayer, and that's part of their rule. But it's not given to them by the church. It's just something that they live in their own community. And a lot of them do that, right? But priests are the ones all priests, whether religious or secular, are bound to pray the breviary every day.
Right. And so it depends on the community, right? So for permanent deacons, a lot of times that varies from diocese to diocese. The ordinary decides.
Really?
That's what I've heard. That's in some dioceses, or maybe it's just this is what I've heard from some deacons. So take it or leave it. But they're only obliged to pray morning and evening prayer. I bet the local ordinary has the power to do that.
I have not. No, I don't think so because it's the law that binds all clerics.
Interesting.
Keep on talking. I'm gonna do a little research.
If we were editor's desk, we could go to the law and figure this out.
Where do you think I'm going right now?
Okay. But definitely in religious communities, you follow your own rule, and there can be variations in that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things about this recent edition of the Liturgy of the Hours is that it has certain focuses in the reform. One was to make it more applicable to the modern life of the priest.
Right.
So it has been simplified and shortened. I find it interesting in reading The Priest Is Not His Own by Fulton Sheen, Bishop Fulton Sheen, that he has a little section on the Liturgy of the Hours. And of course, what he's talking about is why is the Liturgy of the Hours so hard for priests? Why is it so difficult? That very much for priests at his time, the Liturgy of the Hours very much felt like a dry obligation. And that could be for several reasons. One, it was definitely longer. Two, it's in Latin. And just because you can say all the Latin words at Mass doesn't mean you have a firm grasp of Latin. So it can very much feel like just going through the motions for not all priests, but this was a thing. And his conclusion was, well, I guess that's good because this is a part of our suffering for the world. By doing this obligation, by feeling the pain of dragging your eyes and moving your lips to say the words that are in the breviary, you are being very priestly. You're offering up your pain for the world, which I thought was a clever way to go about it. I was expecting him to say, this is why the Liturgy of the Hours is so beautiful and wonderful. But that's not the first thing he went for.
Right.
Interesting. But yeah, so it's been simplified in that way.
Yeah.
One of the other ways it's been changed is that some of the cursing psalms, some of the cranky psalms,
which is
are not in the Liturgy of the Hours. So there isn't the entirety of 150 psalms in the Liturgy of the Hours, which I think makes some priests and seminarians a little bit cranky. We want to pray all of the hours,
right?
All of the psalms. But the reason why, at least in the Apostolic Constitution that was promulgated before this, was that because it was being translated in the vernacular, they were afraid it was going to upset some people. And so my interpretation is the reason we don't have all the cranky psalms, the reason why we don't do that is because we don't want old ladies in churches being scared about praying about bashing their enemies' babies across rocks.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe the pastoral reason why it's not.
Yeah. So update.
Yeah.
Update. So I was looking into this.
Yeah.
So canon law. This is a
live update.
270 canon 276 subsection 3. Priests and deacons aspiring to the presbyterate are obliged to carry out the liturgy of the hours daily according to the proper and approved liturgical books. Permanent deacons, however, are to carry out the same to the extent defined by the Conference of Bishops. And so then there's something so it's not something up to a local bishop, it's something up to the Conference of Bishops to decide what a permanent deacon is to pray. And it's very interesting. This is from the Congregation for Divine Worship, actually. So this is a little actually interesting thing that they even have a thing saying, like, if a priest has to say multiple masses in a day or has to hear several hours of confession, he may have, after examining his conscience, if he feels that he's done a lot, then he's not bound, but he's not under any pain of sin for missing it. One of the hours or something. I was like, oh, that's actually, I never heard that before. I was actually kind of, not that I'm going to use that as an excuse now, but it's just like,
right.
I was like, oh, that's reasonable to hear, because I think it's recognizing you're offering liturgy in so much the other way that it's not the end of the world if you miss daytime prayer because of that.
Right. So let's talk about that. So we made as secular priests a promise to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, right? And I very much saw that. Not that, but for example, at my first assignments, I might have a 7 a.m. Mass a 9 o'clock mass and then an 11 o'clock mass.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, 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 boom. Right. So I might pray early in the morning, maybe the office of readings, but I have to go open up the church. I have to make sure everything's closed. Things are set for the next mass. Do all these things in between hand. Maybe I preach for too long. So in that schedule, I think that would be one of those reasons where maybe I don't do morning prayer that day. But when I'm done with all my masses, I move right on to daytime prayer.
Right.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. I'll read the. Is the obligation sub gravi extended to the entire recitation of the divine office? And the Congregation for Divine Worship says this: a serious reason, be it of health, or of pastoral service and ministry, or of an act of charity, or of fatigue, not a simple inconvenience, may excuse the partial recitation and even the entire office, according to the general principle that establishes that a mere ecclesiastical law does not bind when a serious inconvenience is present. The total or partial omission of the office due to laziness alone or due to the performance of activities of a necessary diversion is not listed, and even more so, constitutes an underestimation according to the gravity of the ministerial office and the positive law of the church. And it's interesting. It actually makes a distinction in the I'm going to read this a bit more, actually, if that's okay, because it's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is not planned at all. To omit the hours.
And we're going to get to more about lay people in the office in a moment. So don't turn off if you're not a cleric. Don't worry. But this is I'm learning.
I'm learning too. This is great. To omit the hours of morning prayer and evening prayer requires a greater reason still. Again, that these hours are the double hinge of the daily office.
Right.
From Sacrosanctum Concilium. If a priest must celebrate Mass several times on the same day, or hear confessions for several hours, or preach several times on the same day, and this causes him fatigue, he may consider with tranquility of conscience that he has a legitimate excuse for omitting a proportionate part of the office. So there you go. That was interesting. What I like about that, it's actually very balanced. It is fair. That this is, but it's also interesting. It shows that really the two important parts of it are morning and evening prayer.
And so a lot of times when lay people first get into praying the divine office, a lot of times there'll be like shortened divine offices, which are just morning and evening prayer, because those are the hinges. Those are the big prayers. They're longer than some of the other ones. So that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But one of the other reasons for the reform of the Liturgy of the Hours is to try to bring together personal prayer and liturgy. Let's see. Where is this statement? I'll look for it later. But it says in the Apostolic Constitution somewhere that there should never be a conflict between personal prayer and the liturgy of and liturgy in general. That these things ideally should be squooshed together. And so it talks about the priest should teaches people about the Psalms. And that just reminded me of, in seminary, we had to either take, at least for me, I had the choice of taking the prophets or taking the Psalms. Because of my course schedule, I can only pick one.
Yeah.
I ended up picking prophets. I don't regret that because it gave me a great scope of Old Testament biblical history, and I very much enjoyed that class. But I wish I could also take Psalms.
Yeah.
And this priest, who's a professor in Psalms, would lament in his class, because this is what he teaches, this is what he studies. He says, you will never hear, and I bet you will never preach, a Sunday homily based around or centered around the psalm response. And I think it's kind of true. Like, I rarely even reference the psalm response. So maybe that can be a challenge for Advent.
I've preached on the odd psalm before.
Right.
But not often.
On Sunday?
A couple times.
Okay, look at you.
But my... But my Old Testament prof had the same thing. I never hear enough preaching on the Psalms, and it's like, it's fair. It's fair.
Yeah. But getting back to,
you just make a great point. Something Father Paul Hedman brought up on Twitter the other day, because he said this, and I think it's a good point. I haven't done it yet, but this is a great time because the general instructions for the liturgy hour, not the germ, but the general instructions for the liturgy hours. I guess the jith, jith. He says that, it's a good time of year to go over it again to see if you maybe got a little lazy about something or whatever. And I thought, it's a good point. And one of the things he brought up was how it's encouraged, when doable, to pray this publicly in the parish for anyone to join. So then it becomes that public expression. And I didn't know that. I was like, that's actually, or at least you try at least once a week in a parish, maybe before a Friday Mass or something like that, or during adoration or something, you're going to do this as a parish.
Yeah. Our seminarian here has started a Monday night class. It's like a teaching and that sort of thing. And a lot of times there's also adoration, and they pray the Liturgy of the Hours.
Yeah.
And the people have really gotten into this, and they're like, can we sing it? And so now he's teaching them how to chant. And one of the things that it talks about as a way to make this a more personal prayer is that it allows for different communities to decide their own chant tones. Mm-hmm. So I remember there's some Meinrad chant tones, a lot of tones that a lot of seminarians use. But I remember visiting a congregation of religious sisters. I forget which one it was, but they do their psalm tones based on the punctuation at the end of each line. Mm-hmm. It was how they did it. So that's what notes they would pick and everything. Right. And it was really neat.
Cool.
But let's talk about the spiritual benefits of this bad boy.
Yes. I know, but here's the thing. The canon law fans of this podcast are just going to eat that part up.
I'm sure they will. They'll love it. Yeah. You're welcome. We've got a wide audience. It's hard to cater to everybody.
Listen, theology is still the queen of the sciences, though.
Everyone, including Ed Condon, has agreed with that.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, why? Okay, Harrison.
Yes.
Father Harrison. What are the spiritual benefits of praying this? Or what have the spiritual benefits for you been praying this Liturgy of the Hours?
I'll be honest. Like some days there are those up times with it, and sometimes there are those down times where you're just like, I've got 20 things going on today, and I got to squeeze this in. It is, I will say, I think the life of a modern priest, it is probably harder today to do it when there's a lack of stability, not just in terms of like parish assignments or anything, but also a lack of stability in daily life. Your daily life, it's very hard to order around a pattern of life. This is saying, let's set up a rhythm of life. And those days are hard. It's hard to get that going sometimes. So, but for me, where it's been a benefit is actually that fact of rhythm. Like I think when the church gives us our liturgical life, it's there to really kind of guide the rhythm of our life. So like I know especially when we were locked down back in March, this actually became a great help during my day. It kind of, because days and weeks blended together so easily, you kind of lose track of time a bit. This kept me in time. And so it also, like, listen, there are those days where you're just like, it's hard to pray. Yeah. But I know if I do this, Christ is praying for the church through me.
Yeah. Regardless
of how into it I feel or whatever. Sometimes I can read it faster, but it's always, and it's, when I do that, there's a little question that says, slow down, contemplate it a bit. And that's always like, I'm grateful for that question to me, because it's like, no, this is not something to be rushed through. This is something to be contemplated, and take your time with it. And this is so those have been a few of the spiritual benefits for me. And also, like, sometimes, like, there are some office of readings that I really look forward to. So, a little hint for those who like to do the whole office. A parent, from what I've been told, you can sometimes, if it's just like a regular reading of the day, you can supplement the second reading with something else. I have to look into that, but that's what I've been told. And because sometimes one of my favorite readings from the Office of Readings is from St. John Chrysostom in September, when he talks about glorifying both Christ in both his church and in the poor by lavishing them both with gifts. It's one of the most powerful homilies. I look forward to it every year, right? I think it's like the first Saturday of September usually, or something like that. I look forward to that reading every year. And so some of those have been really spiritually nourishing, right? Coming back to the same readings over and over again, having a lot of, because of this, I memorize a lot of scripture.
Yeah.
Just because I say this every single day. So there's been a ton of, like, those are some of the benefits that I would think of off the top of my head. What about yourself?
Yeah. The one I want to bring up is that the Psalms, praying the Psalms will put you in touch with the entire body of Christ. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you pray the Psalms and you're like, this Psalm does not apply to me today.
Yeah.
I'm having a terrible day and this is about praising God.
Yeah.
Or the opposite. I'm having a great day and this Psalm is very sad. What's going on here? And it puts you in touch with the rest of the body of Christ, because if you're having a good day and you're reading a penitential psalm or a sorrowful psalm, it reminds you that there are members of the body of Christ who are going through very difficult times right now. Mm-hmm. And by reading that psalm, you're not as far away from them as you used to be. Because if we are to be one body, if you stub your pinky toe, your entire body feels it. And it's important that your entire body feels it. In the same way that we need to experience both the joy and the sorrow of the entire body. Mm-hmm. Also, I think it helps balance out the spiritual life. Mm-hmm. That in times of joy and consolation, those are good and should be accepted. But we also have to remind ourselves that there's also going to be hardships. Mm-hmm. When we're spiritually dry, when we have desolation, we read the Psalms of praise and remember that desolation does not last forever, and there's hope. And sometimes even reading the Psalms of praise can lift you out of that desolation. Mm-hmm. Praying it in private allows you to make it spiritual reading. So if you have time in the middle of the day and I'm going to read these Psalms really slowly and use them as spiritual reading, you can do that. In communities, it's suggested that there be times of silence in between the Psalms. Mm-hmm. And that can be a difficult thing. Because if you're in a community, every community has its own proclivities, if you will, about how they pray it and stuff. And that can sometimes be a source of consternation for individual members of the community. Mm-hmm. But at least, especially with the... and it's funny because I used to be so annoyed by praying in community when I was in seminary. And now I really miss it. And the times that I've got to pray in community, I'm like, oh, wow, this is really nice. Mm-hmm. Also singing the Psalms in community. That's a thing I miss. Mm-hmm. The times we chanted the Psalms.
I would say one thing I miss a lot is that time of praying with my brothers in seminary. I remember I'd go visit the seminary a couple times after I was ordained, and that time of communal evening prayer was really beautiful. It was really very nourishing. But
to wrap up, both why and then how you should pray the Liturgy of the Hours. Why? Because it is the prayer of the church. You're entering into the prayer of the body of Christ. It is a connection to the Mass. So especially now, if you can't get to Mass, a good way to connect yourself to that is by praying the Liturgy of the Hours. It can help balance out your spiritual life. It helps sanctify moments of your day. And part of the reason, for us, why it's so important for us to pray is that we have to fight to make Christ the center of our lives, even in ministry. And the discipline of praying the Liturgy hours helps us to fight for that, right?
Yeah.
And that's very true in regular old secular lay life. That can be a good thing. Mm-hmm. How to pray it, I would honestly suggest getting something like iBreviary, because with that, you kind of can just read it straight through.
Yeah, and it's free.
It's free. The tough thing with the books, even though I like praying with them better, is that the ribbons and flipping from pages, you've got to have someone teach you, and it's for me at least, the only way to really learn it is to practice it with people who know how to do it.
Yeah.
But if you can get a group together and you're like, hey, we're going to pray the Liturgy of the Hours every Thursday night, that can be a really good thing.
Yeah.
Also, these books are a wee bit expensive to get a 4-volume set.
Yeah, they're about $200 for a full-volume set, I think.
Yeah, they are. But there are neat little mini Liturgy of the Hours, like the office of the little office of the Blessed Virgin. It's a kind of Liturgy of the Hours, a little more Marian-centered. It's shorter, and hey, that's a good way to enter into it. Not nearly as expensive of a book. You also can just get the same publisher, whoever makes this one. They have volumes that are just morning and evening prayer. But it's one of those things, like any kind of prayer practice, I think to appreciate it, you've got to give it a try for a while. Give it a try for a few weeks. Or you know what? You can be one of those wonderful parishioners that goes to your pastor and says, hey, can we pray Liturgy of the Hours one night a week or something like that? And then you can volunteer to help organize it. Look at that. Something like that. But it's a big part of the church. It's one of those parts of Vatican II that has not been implemented as well as it probably could be.
Although I would push against that a bit, because I've seen a lot of people, especially I'd say kind of our generation of people, a lot of them love to pray some form of the Liturgy of the Hours. It's very common. Yeah. It's very common, I find. And I learned in 2004 after my conversion, I'd go to RCA and the priest, he'd get a group of people together to pray night prayer together every night. That's how I started praying the breviary, right? And that was great, and that was helpful. I think it's happening. I think it could happen more, but I think there's a lot out there.
Yeah, I think there probably is, and it's more and more. I think it's a movement that's going. But like I remember growing up, I had no idea that the liturgy hours was even a thing. So I think a lot of people in pews probably the same way, except that I talk about it every once in a while in my preaching.
Right.
But it's a good thing to do. It's the prayer of the universal church.
Yep.
And that's what I got. Any final thoughts, Father Harrison?
Only that I made a massive mistake and I forgot to press record on the YouTube video.
Well,
that's just fine.
I mean, you win some, you lose some.
You win some, you lose some. That's it. That's all I got.
Well, thanks for listening. Please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends about the podcast. Tell your enemies too, because Jesus says we must love our enemies. You can find me devoutly praying the Liturgy of the Hours.
You can find me at FR Harrison on Twitter.
Contact the podcast and receive updates at ClericalPod on Twitter. Find us on Facebook. Sometimes find us on YouTube or email us at clericallyspeaking@gmail.com. Peace.
God bless.